So far, Israel almost expelled everyone from the north. Gaza has been declared as a disaster zone several weeks back in the north with this barbaric Israeli Zionist campaign of the general's plan, they call it, to ethnically cleanse everyone from the north. They have been destroying hospitals, refugee camps, and today they forcibly expelled people from the last refugee place. People were seeking shelter in a school. Some of them were getting lost. They were imprisoning many of them. And the total numbers of the Israeli actions in their genocide in North Gaza in the past 51 days, ever since they started to implement this general's plan that they call, is 3,700 people have been killed or are missing. 3,700 in 51 days, 10,000 wounded, and 1,750 people kidnapped by Israel. That's from the north only in the past 51 days. In the total, we're talking about 45,000. This is the official number, apart from the 10,000 missing and over 120,000 people wounded. And despite that, they're continuing their massacres. Today, they targeted Al-Nusayrat refugee camp, killing over 25 people, with dozens of people wounded, including women and children. They're doing this as if it's a norm. People are using any sort of events to, as in ignore what's happening. That's not something that should be ignored. The Israeli genocide in Gaza is the worst and most pressing topic, and it must be stopped immediately. And when it comes to the countries who are participating in this, although there are talks about positivity, but not enough action is being taken to stop what's happening. With regards to the statements coming from the United States in terms of Jake Sullivan and even Antony Blinken, they're talking about a potential of a ceasefire within weeks. Previous reports said Donald Trump asked Netanyahu to finish the war before he comes in. He was even asked, do you trust Netanyahu? He said, I don't trust anyone, but I asked him to finish the war before that. And more statements coming from the US. However, again, the United States has been buying Israel time throughout its genocide. And the only thing that they've been doing is supporting them with weapons, expanding their terror to Lebanon, to Syria, and other countries too. And now they are warning Iran. And this warning came in the form of a speech from Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu always tries to address the Iranian people of other nations, saying that, Israel is looking for peace and we love you and we want to have peace with you. They'll do that with the Syrian people, do that with even the people of Gaza, funny enough. And Netanyahu is addressing the Iranians. And usually when Benjamin Netanyahu asks people or addresses people and talks about peace and prosperity, you need to wait for war. You need to wait for a genocide to happen. So he addressed the Iranian people, the citizens of Iran, saying that your regime is afraid of you. A day will come and Iran will be free. Together, we will realize a future of peace much sooner than you think. Okay. Prosperity, the regime is oppressing you. We are, same people. The Iranian government is wasting billions abroad. And, he's talking about tyranny and all of these things, typical propaganda coming from Israel about Iran. However, why is Netanyahu saying all of that about Iran, especially his statement in his speech that he had, by the way, just a couple of hours ago, especially the phrase, together we will realize the future of peace much sooner than you think. What does Benjamin Netanyahu mean by much sooner than you think? If you observe in the Israeli media, there has been a lot of talk about Iran. People are showing pride in the fact that, Israel is now occupying territories further into Syria. They're gradually withdrawing from Lebanon, but they haven't withdrawn completely. Today they withdrew or started to withdraw from Al-Khiyam following the entry of the Lebanese army. And despite many breaches, Hezbollah are still looking at it in a very important manner to try and preserve the ceasefire. They don't want to be dragged into another round now. And that's a tactical move primarily from Hezbollah, because they want to be the ones who are deciding when to expand this. They tried throughout the Al-Aqsa flood to keep everything at bay. However, when things escalated when it comes to Lebanon, the priority started to become to have a full ceasefire in Lebanon, albeit with pressure still being applied on Israel, especially with the situation with the north and the front altogether continuing. I mean, in Gaza, the Palestinian resistance are still targeting all of the Israeli bases. They target Netzarim today with mortar shells, Al-Qassam brigades and Al-Aqsa Martyrs brigades, and also Yemen. Yemen has been targeting Israel regularly, and Israel is worried about Yemen continuing to target them alongside the embargo that they are imposing on Israel. But the talk in the Israeli media, and hence the speech coming from Benjamin Netanyahu, is we need to reach the head of the snake. This is what they're calling Iran, the head of the octopus or the head of the snake. They're saying Iran started the 7th of October. Iran supports Hezbollah. Iran supports Ansarullah in Yemen, and they channel all of these weapons. And we need to get to the bottom of this, and we need to attack Iran. And the logic behind this, as delusional as it may sound, because Israel received massive blows from Iran in True Promise 1 and True Promise 2, and we're still pending a True Promise 3. That's depending on when Iran would see it suitable to, go ahead with True Promise 3. Iran, well, officially at least, they don't have nuclear weapons. So from Israeli perspective, they don't want Iran to reach a nuclear bomb. Although, again, we've had indications from Iran previously after they were threatened with a nuclear bomb by some, Western countries or even some Arab countries going to Iran threatening them by saying we will respond with a similar manner. And they did not elaborate with what is that similar manner. Is it going to be talking about a nuclear bomb, or are they going to land so much on Israel that they will regret the day they launched an attack on Iran? And it's quite unlikely, despite all of the developments in Syria, that Iran will just completely cancel True Promise 3. However, it's again about reaching the objectives politically. Beforehand and previously, the Iranian president, he said that how Israel behaves will affect how hard we hit them back. So there's more talk about attacking Iran from Israel, and Benjamin Netanyahu is leading that line. Benjamin Netanyahu is leading that front. He wants to attack Iran, and he knows that the United States is still arming him despite all of the crimes that he is committing. Which leads me to the next point that I wanted to talk to you about. Iran and Turkey, they've always had relationships. They've always had relations, and the trade levels between Iran and Turkey have been very intense, despite differences on Syria, despite differences in the global arena. But now they're taking it to the next level. Now they are signing a trade deal cooperation agreement set to 30 billion. 30 billion, that's a massive increase in the trade between Iran and between Turkey. Trade, transport, customs, transit, investment, banking, electricity, agriculture, culture, tourism, and cooperation. And one thing that it's important to note here, no one is talking about any, military or, intel cooperation here. After the Al-Aqsa flood started, there was a constant room between Iran and Turkey about what's happening. And they meet regularly when it comes to that. And now, with the changes that are happening in Syria, The meetings between Iran and Turkey intensified, and this cooperation with them that is primarily financial, it only indicates the level of ties that are happening between Turkey and Iran, despite the fact that the relationship between the two is portrayed as somewhat, hostile, according to some many people. And that's another indication that they are cooperating again when it comes to Syria. There has been a lot of talk about continued cooperation. And when it comes to Syria now, Iran made more statements. Firstly, the supreme leader of Iran, Sayyid Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, he had a post on X. In his post, he said, the insurgency front or the resistance front will drive the US out of the region and destroy the foundation of Zionism. That's yesterday. He also added 2 hours ago that the young Syrians will liberate the territories occupied by the Zionist entity. The young Syrians will liberate the territories occupied by the Zionist entity. Again, a change in tone when it comes to Iran and everything that has been happening in Syria. In previous years, some of the movements that used to be part of the Syrian opposition or fight in Syria, well, Iran was present in Syria under the excuse of fighting them. And now, especially several days back, about 4 or 5 days ago, just before the collapse of the Assad regime, all of a sudden everything changed when it comes to Iran, and now they are even indicating that they still have a supply. They still have a supply. What's the supply? Well, the main body concerned about the supply for the resistance, or supporting the resistance when it comes to Iran, is the IRGC Major General Commander-in-Chief Hussein Salami. Hussein Salami, he said actually, well, no, the supply line is still open. Ways to support the resistance fronts are open and not limited to Syria. And he added, when it comes to Syria, things are developing. What does he mean by things are developing? Things are developing meaning that, well, there's a level of coordination. That coordination is not something that's going to be made public. But clearly, Iran hasn't stopped, even when it comes to Hezbollah in Lebanon, especially when it comes to the routes that they used to provide for Hezbollah. So the report said, we were aware of the movements of militias and takfiris in Syria during the past months, and we were able to identify the fronts of the possible attack and inform the relevant military and political officials in Syria about that. But there was no will to change. Some expect the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps to fight the battle instead of the Syrian army. But it's logical for us to fight in another country while the army of that country stands by and watches. Now, that's not the full picture. That sentiment was, again, portrayed by the Russians too. But the way everything is being portrayed in Iran when it comes to Syria is changing with time. And then he added that the power of Iran hasn't declined. Otherwise, we would have not carried out True Promise 1 and True Promise 2. He pointed out the need to change strategies according to the situation, explaining that Iran makes appropriate decisions, acts based on its capabilities and talents, and has strong political logic for fighting. And the paths to support the resistance front, and this does not mean that all paths are limited to Syria. These fronts are open, and even there, the matter may gradually take another form again. So clearly, Iran is continuing. And the other day, we had statements from the Supreme Leader saying that no, people are wrong. People are saying, the resistance front is weaker. They're wrong. We're actually stronger than ever before. And again, strong messages against the United States and Israel. With Israel, again, trying to raise tensions between Iran and have all of these threats. How substantiated are they? How relevant are they, the threats of Benjamin Netanyahu, when it comes to Iran? I mean, at the end of the day, they are an expansionist, neo-colonialist entity. But when it comes to Iran in particular, well, we saw what their attack did in Iran. It was a massive failure. They had very limited effect. They carried out the strike from Iraqi airspace that is controlled by the United States. And, well, Iran took down the majority of the missiles or projectiles that Israel launched on Iran. There were 5 people who were soldiers in the Iranian army, not the IRGC, but it wasn't that effective. And then again, based on the previous responses that we saw from Iran, the Iranian effect on Israel is far greater than the effect that Israel can have on Iran. It was a coward attack, full of cowardice, and they did not achieve their objectives. Israel only acts, like it goes ahead and, with this fake bravery of theirs when the other side is unable to respond. So either you're talking about innocent civilians or lack of capacities to confront them. However, Iran proved that they have significant capabilities when it comes to attacks, especially with their strategic missiles, and they have significant capabilities when it comes to the defense, especially with the anti-aircraft that has been used following the Israeli attack, the Zionist attack in Iran. Which leads me to Syria. In Syria, things are developing very fast, and now there are more indications that things might take a positive turn, where in the northeastern part. What's in the northeastern part? Well, the northeastern part is the area that is controlled by the SDF, or the Syrian version of the PKK, called YPG in general. Well, Turkey considers them all as one. The problem is, for Syrians, is that the SDF is backed by the United States of America. They're backed by the United States of America. But today they released this post here. Well, they posted it on X. On the occasion of the victory of the will of the Syrians and the overthrow of the oppressive regime, the Democratic People's Council decided to raise the flag of independence on all institutions of the democratic self-administration in the region of the North and East Syria, affirming the unity of Syria and its national identity. Yes, some were celebrating the collapse of Bashar al-Assad, but not to a level where they automatically endorse what's happening now. However, before we reach that stage, and on the map, we're talking about the massive expansion with the transition government backed by Turkey, deep into SDF-controlled territory, Deir ez-Zor, and now there were protests in Al-Raqqa, which is a very important hub at the heart of the northeastern part of Syria. But they're still there. Now, what is the excuse of SDF and what is the excuse of the United States? The excuse of the United States is that we're supporting the SDF so that ISIS cannot pop up again. They are imprisoning thousands of people, and Raqqa was the main hub for ISIS inside of Syria. Although ISIS was a tool that it was being used by many countries across the world, right? Primarily Western intelligence agencies, but also including other countries regionally, including within Syria. Okay, what is the limit? What is the limit? Before the attacks began heavily by the Syrian transition government, backed by Turkey, the United States sent a warning and sent one of the top figures in the US Army, Kurilla, to the region to try and intimidate, try and show that, look, we're supporting them here. What did the United States say? They said before this offensive began, they said, do not come close to the areas of SDF and do not carry out operations towards the east of the Euphrates. You can't attack in these areas. We're supporting them here. This is our area. Another problem is, well, the United States controls oil fields. However, even with the oil fields, the United States withdrew from one of their oil fields in Syria following repeated attacks in the past 14 months. And they are looking to continue and control some of these oil fields with the SDF being present there. But the problem is, people are feeling the vibe in that area. People are celebrating in the streets, and you have clashes between the population in the northeast of Syria and the SDF to a level where they force them to retreat in that area. But the fact that there are certain diplomatic moves happening indicate that, well, there could be a process that would not include a lot of bloodshed, similar to what happened with the deterrence of aggression, where, well, simply, in many cases, the Assad army was just fleeing or, handing in their weapons, and just a few battles really here and there, and then Assad ended up fleeing. So could we see the same thing in northeast Syria? Potentially, but so far you're talking about a movement that is feeling like they still have the backing of the US, but they have the pressure of a couple of things. Number one, the momentum of the Syrian people. So they're saying, you created SDF and you have this campaign here because you had, what the claim is, you had an authoritarian or repressive government, for example. Well, now we took it down. What are you going to do? We're trying to unite the country here, and we're trying to have all of the Syrians together. But you also have, it's not just that, you also have power coming from the transition government, both the SNA and HTS, backed by Turkey. And they're feeling that pressure because now the central government of Syria, the transition government, has over 30 to 40% territories in total, if not even 50%, than what the previous Assad government had. That means there's more momentum geographically against them. There's popular demand. There's internal public demand too, because these people are part of Syria at the end of the day. There's, of course, the whole argument about the division and the map and the Sykes-Picot, and that traditionally this area was split in an unfair manner, especially with the population in the historical area of Kurdistan. That's indeed something that the colonizers or ex-colonizers that are still operating wanted to have. Like the traditional Kurdistan area split between Syria, Iran, Iraq, and Turkey. But fact of the matter is, we have a move that is looking towards having a united Syria for everyone to be included in that, and clearly this indication, this statement from the self-governing location in the northeastern part of Syria indicates that there could be something hopeful and not bloody when it comes to uniting that part with the rest of the Syria for the sake of the Syrian people. And the final thing that I wanted to talk to you about, it's linked to this. So the challenges that are being faced now in Syria, by the transition government, are primarily the territories. You have the SDF heavily backed by the US in the northeast, and you have a Zionist expansionist state in the south, land grabbing, occupying more territories and trying to intimidate people in the south and expel them. Israel's plan is trying to capitalize on certain minorities, in particular the Druze community. You have links between Syria, the occupied Golan Heights, Israel, and Lebanon. They're trying to create a bigger kind of Druze location in the south, and having them basically as cannon fodder inside of Syria, to be a front to protect Israel, because Israel does not protect minorities. Israel uses minorities, and they try and capitalize on everything to do with minorities. That's why the transition government in Syria was trying to reassure as much as possible all of the minorities and depart from all of the problems that Syria faced in the past 14 years, to have them under them. But Israel is still capitalizing on that and is still using the scare campaign, well, alongside many, of course, when it comes to Syria, that no, the new Syrian government, they will, haunt you down, take you down, they will abuse you, etc. Although conflicting images and, no conflict, the opposite is coming really from Syria on the ground, from people on the ground in Syria. So if they are able to, and that's an important development here when it comes to the self-governing part of the northeastern part of Syria, if they are able to, that's it, include them in new Syrian government, get the recognition, because again, the new government Syria is facing problems globally too. The HTS are still considered a terrorist organization, and the United States and the countries that label it are still trying to use that card as much as possible to extract positions during an era where a new Syria is being born. And they are doing that primarily for the sake of Israel, not for the sake of anyone else. And in Israel, the thought process is, we need a demilitarized, maybe Syria. We could potentially start with a demilitarized south and then a demilitarized whole state. In effect, sucking everything out of the, sovereignty of Syria. Because at the end of the day, Israel knows that if they unilaterally cancelled the 1974 agreement they had with the previous Syrian government, well, they told the world then, that's it. Any understanding that we have with Syria is now gone. What does that mean for the Syrian side too? Well, if you cut this understanding, that means we can cut the understanding from our end, especially when it comes to the Golan Heights, because the whole Golan Heights are occupied. The Golan Heights have been occupied since 1967. And what Israel is doing, by the way, is firstly a show to kind of ruin the Syrian people's joy when it comes to the fall of Assad, right? And then try to intimidate, but primarily, that's the true essence of it, it's panic and fear coming from Israel. It's panic and fear, and in the grand scheme of things, they're shooting themselves in the foot. Why? Because throughout all of the period of the Syrian revolution, Israel used to always say, we support the revolution, we support the rebels. They even supported some of the people in the south in Israel. And they constantly say, yeah, we have to, of course, get rid of Bashar al-Assad and all of that. Okay. Well, many people didn't believe them. Some probably fell for it. But what are they doing now, in effect? In effect, now what they're saying is, well, no, sorry, we weren't really serious. We want to control territories of South Syria. And the United States and some countries, well, primarily the United States, are trying to whitewash what Israel's doing to the highest extent, by saying that, these measures are temporary. The Israelis told us that, they have worries. And then they released a statement saying that, we want to make sure terror doesn't establish itself in Syria. Terror doesn't establish itself in Syria. You have a war criminal entity next to Syria, charged as a genocide entity by the ICJ, right? Well, blamed for committing a genocide blatantly on very limited facts, by the way. If we add in all of the facts, they will be, blamed with far worse things than that. And you have a prime minister and an ex-defense minister who are wanted for war crimes. And the United States itself, who's talking about, the administration was talking about not having the potential of terror establishing itself in Syria. They are the great grandmother of terrorism of modern day history. They established their country on mass ethnic cleansing of the indigenous natives in America. And they have been always supporting genocides and wars across the world and mass terror, and are protecting an entity that has committed the worst genocide and still is in the 21st century. Mm. However, still, despite all of that, and many people know that, Syria is in a very vulnerable position. Israel ruined all of the army. You're talking about a need to rebuild. You know, half of Syria is destroyed. You know, whole towns and cities are destroyed. And you're talking about healing wounds of 14 years, right? And they want to establish themselves. They want to make sure everything is fine when it comes to security, when it comes to financially and the rebuilding process. And there are a lot of efforts to do with this rebuilding, but the Israeli threat will always be there. Israel is the main cause of problems. And even if or when the transition government reaches an understanding with the northeastern part, SDF controlled territories, which is a priority because we're talking about a third of Syria now, well, just about 25%. That's a significant chunk of land. They would still be facing that threat coming from Israel, and Israel has traditionally showed that, well, they don't really understand the language of diplomacy. Is diplomacy going to work? If diplomacy is going to work, well, the new government is going to have to give in concessions. Are they going to give concessions? And how is that going to be taken by the Syrian public? So many interesting things are going ahead. A relevant key player here, of course, is Turkey. And well, Erdogan said the next 3 months will change the face of the world and will be detrimental for Turkey as well. So are we going to see things heating up and getting interesting? We will see, depending on how things develop, and we will, of course, keep talking about them.